In this video, we'll be going over indirect object pronouns in Spanish. So let's first talk about what exactly an indirect object pronoun is. What this is going to be is a pronoun, or a word that replaces a person or a thing to make it simpler. It's a pronoun that indicates the recipient of an action. So what exactly do I mean by this? Well, when I say, I give this to you. I give this to you. Right now we have two pronouns in here. We have I and we have you. Now I is what's known as the subject pronoun. That's who does the action. But the indirect object pronoun here is going to be you. So in this case, because you are receiving it, we're going to use an indirect object pronoun for that. Now it's very important to make the distinction between these and the yo, tú, ele, usted, all of that. Just remember that the yo, tú, ele, usted, that chart is going to be for people that do the action. These are just for people that receive the action. The most important thing is to be able to distinguish between those two so that you don't get confused. So te does not mean you in the sense of you doing the action, it means you in the sense of receiving the action. Now these are a little bit different than direct object pronouns, as well as direct object pronouns are more what the action is happening to, versus these are who is receiving the action. So if I were to change this to it, I give it to you. Now we have three different pronouns. We have a subject pronoun, who's doing the action, a direct object pronoun, who the action is happening to, the giving is happening to it, and finally, who's receiving the action, which is going to be you. So with indirect object pronouns, just make sure that we're looking at the recipient of an action. So in order to translate all of these into English, what I would say is that these are all to or for someone. So we'll put that up here, the recipient, can be to/for someone. So, for example, when we say me, it's not I, it's to or for me. Te, to or for you. Le, to or for. There's a few different ones it could be. It could be him, it could be her, could be it, or it could be you formal. Nos, to or for us. And finally, les is going to be to or for them. To or for them, or you guys. So now let's go into placement, because the placement rules for this are a little bit different than in English. So for example, if I were to say, I say to him, I say to him, what we would say is le digo. Yo le digo or le digo. And that's because the placement works like this. The placement is going to go before the conjugated verb or negative command, and attached to the end of infinitives, affirmative commands, and finally gerunds, which is essentially ing in Spanish, or ando and yendo. So if I were to say I am saying, we would attach it to the end. If I were to say I'm saying to him, estoy diciéndole. So you can see the le is going to the end. It's going to be ando or yendo. Now the two main ones that we're going to focus on is coming before the conjugated verb and getting attached to the end of infinitives. These are going to be the most common ones. Unless we're working on like commands, let's say, you'll see a lot of these with commands. But overall, I would say the two most common contexts is definitely the most common one would be before the conjugated verb, and then you'll see them often attached to the end of infinitives. So, for example, when we're looking at this first one, I say to him, you can see that I say, digo, and then to him, instead of saying digo le, we say le digo. Le digo would be the correct way to say it here. It's almost like saying to him I say. Now, you can see that that sounds weird in English, but one thing to note is that between a lot of different languages, word order actually does not matter that much. So for example, if I were to make my own language, I could put whatever word order I wanted into it as long as I'm communicating this idea. And so Even though directly translating this would sound very weird in English, in Spanish, this is what sounds correct. Digo le does not sound correct. So I say to him, look at another one. For example, I buy for you. I buy for you. So I actually do something different. We'll do they buy for you. They buy for you. So usually the process that I like to go for these is to first identify the verb, then conjugate the verb, then identify the indirect object pronoun, and finally choose the right one and put it in the right spot. So let's start with the verb, to buy, comprar. Now, who's doing the buying here? It's not going to be compras. You're not buying. It's people are buying for you, right? It's they buy. So it's going to be compran. So they buy, compran. You could also say ellos compran. We don't necessarily need the ellos. Depends on the context, but a lot of times the ellos is kind of implied within it. Now, it could be ustedes as well, so sometimes I like to include the ellos. But a lot of times you don't necessarily need it. So say ellos compran. And then for you, now you're the recipient here. It's not going to be tú, it will be te, since you are receiving. So te, and let's look at the placement before the conjugated verb. So we'll go right here. Ellos te compran. Ellos te compran. Now, another thing to note is that the subject verb is, the subject right here is going to come before the indirect object pronoun. You can see that it's basically sandwiched in between these two. So just note that when I say before the conjugated verb, that means directly before the conjugated verb. Right before that conjugation, we're going to put the indirect object pronoun. Now, let's do another example. We'll say, they are going to buy for you. They are going to buy for you. The reason why I want to include this one is because in this case, we can show an example with an infinitive and also how there's actually two ways to say this in Spanish instead of just one. So if I were to say they are going to buy for you, I would say te van a comprar or van a comprarte. Now let's break this down real quick. So first, in order to say going to do something in Spanish, we have to use ir plus a plus infinitive, if you remember that. So we have our version of ir right here. It's conjugated in the they form because it's they are going to buy for you. Not you are going to buy for you, they are going to buy for you. They're doing the action. So we'll say van plus a plus our infinitive, which is comprar. So van a comprar would mean they're going to buy. Now we have for you at the end. This is indicating the recipient. But you can see that we actually have two different ways to say this. And that's because of how Spanish works. You can see that it'll go either before the conjugated verb or at the end of infinitives attached to the end. So in this first example, we're placing it before the conjugated verb. The conjugation right here is our form of ir, van. So te van a comprar or van a comprarte. You can see right here, just attaching it to the end. So I just wanted to go over that one real quick to show you the two different ways to do it. And then real quick to note, you can go also watch my videos on commands if you want to learn a little bit more about this. Not really going to dive into this in this video, but you can see negative commands. It's going to go before them, and then affirmative commands, it's going to go attached at the end. It's kind of a weird quirk about Spanish, but anytime you're commanding someone not to do something, you have to put it before. Anytime you're commanding someone to do something, you're going to have to put it at the end. And then gerunds as well, going to go at the end, unless if you want to put it before your form of estar. So overall, that's indirect object pronouns. You can see that they work a little bit different from English, but another thing too to note is that we also have forms of these in English. For example, when we say he, him, he, of course, would be for the person that's the pronoun when you're doing the action, when he's doing the action, and him would be the one for when he's receiving the action or when the action's happening to him. Now, one last thing I just wanted to note is that these are also quite a bit different from direct object pronouns. So once again, to make that distinction, direct object pronouns is when a verb is directly impacting what we were talking about. So for example, I buy it. And then indirect object pronouns is to show the recipient of an action. So for example, I buy for him, that would be indirect. So overall, that's indirect object pronouns in Spanish. I hope that helped, and I'll see you in the next one.